All right, I'll try to make this quick since I know who you're excited about. But anyways, before we begin, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who were able to come out today, especially to our great team of volunteers. Couldn't have done it without you guys. I'd also like to thank our donors, the Lincoln Club, and another donor who's requested to remain anonymous. We couldn't have done it without your support, and we couldn't have done it without all of you being able to willing to come out here today and listen to her speak. Because it's not always easy to listen to conservative ideas on college campuses nowadays. Nowadays, people are very happy to try and shut down speech they don't like. Things have gotten violent in the past. Luckily, that hasn't happened here so far. And oh yeah, also, I'd like to thank the work of our UCI Police Department and the Irvine Police Department for assisting us with this event and taking their job as seriously as possible. I'd also like to thank Lauren for coming out today, all the way from Canada. And Lauren's content is amazing. I've been following her only for like the last year, and it's excellent. Highly recommend her, you watch her channel if you haven't already. But don't take my word for it. She's going to be talking in about now, actually. So, thank you, Lauren.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. All right. Sorry, guys. I'm going to take my shoes off. I always do this before speeches. Wait, get your pictures first with my heels on, please. And I will sue you if you get any without them. Perfect. All right. First of all, thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you for everyone who came out, and of course, the UCI Republicans. Thank you for the invite. Really appreciate it. And of course, the lovely police who came here, set up barricades. So hopefully, it seems like it's all fans in here today. Hopefully you don't really hate this speech, but if you do, there's barricades to protect me if I suck, which is excellent. Anyways, when I first entered college, like many of you here today, I cared about economics for the most part. I cared about mostly social issues. I didn't care about migration. I was more libertarian. It wasn't even something I thought about for the most part. But fast forward to 2017, and the mainstream media thinks I am firing torpedoes at refugee boats in the Mediterranean. How did this happen? How did we get to this point? No, I'm not kidding. This is a real article that existed and had 2,000 shares, I believe. Earlier this year, I went to Catania with a group called Generation Identity to investigate what was going on with mass human trafficking over on the Libyan coast. And there have been thousands of illegal migrants arriving there almost every single day since the day I began to go investigate it with Generation Identity. Up to 3,000 in a single day were coming when I went there in the summer. Now, they're being rescued allegedly by humanitarian boats. And most of these NGO boats are committing illegal acts. They are going and picking them up illegally, and they are going and bringing them in illegally. So governments turn a blind eye to this, though, because of the European Union putting pressure on them and because of other global organizations. So figuring out how these missions were operated was a huge challenge for myself and for Generation Identity. So when I arrived in Sicily, a lot of our time was dedicated, for the most part, to doing recon on how these ships worked. So here's where they would usually come from. They would come from Catania up in Italy or other ports around there, usually Malta as well, and then they would go down, as you can see, all the way down to the coast of Libya and around Tripoli, and they would pick up these people, not in the middle of the water, not out way off the coast. They would go straight down to the coast to pick them up. Another fun fact, you had the safe port of Zaris, 60 nautical miles away from where they were picking up these migrants, quote-unquote refugees, and 275 nautical miles away was Europe. Yet these NGOs decided to go all the way back to Europe. And this is not some conspiracy, this is not just a meme, here is them actually live action going. These are actual ships being tracked, going down to the coast and bringing people back to Libya. This was not some refugee rescue mission. These people were human traffickers. Now, the plan was essentially that Generation Identity would rent a speedboat. They would put up a small protest in front of a boat that we had found after ages of searching called the Aquarius. The Aquarius was a ship that was chartered to go down to Libya and to pick up migrants, and we wanted to do a Greenpeace-style event in front of it. Just stand there for a bit, put up our signs, say we disagree with what you're doing, and then we were going to use that as an advertisement for Defend Europe. Who here has heard of Defend Europe? Yes, all of you, excellent. So Defend Europe was the bigger mission that was going to come later. And the whole thing was going swimmingly. It was, pun intended, it was going fantastic until the time of departure. We were waiting in this small little speedboat near the Aquarius when it was about to leave Sicily, and it kept getting later and later, and the departure kept getting pushed back and back. We were sitting for like 3 hours on this little speedboat until it was pitch black. And we came to a realization that, first of all, if we went out and did this, no one was going to be able to see our boat. They were probably, in fact, just going to run over us if we went out into the waters. And I wasn't going to be able to get any video or pictures of it. So my point for being out there would be moot, and also Generation Identity's mission would fail if we didn't find some way to compete with this. So I had the brilliant idea. Why don't I just light a little flare? Just an itsy-bitsy one. No one will notice, just small, right? I didn't think it was a big deal. So we launched a periscope, we sped towards the boat, I lit the flare, illuminating the water in bright light, and only to be chased down by the Italian Coast Guard, unfortunately. No one was injured, though, and GI got their picture of defiance against the NGO boats, and Aquarius went on its way. Now, right after this, we went out and we got pizza, we relaxed, we celebrated that we didn't get run over by the Aquarius. All the while we were sitting and getting drinks, who here has seen the most recent episode of Family Guy where the little white dog guy tweets out a racist tweet? Anyone? No? Okay. Essentially, he goes and he tweets out something offensive, and he goes to the movie, shuts off his phone, and all the while everyone is freaking out on Twitter. This is essentially exactly what happened to me. The internet took to this story by storm, and when I got back from our lovely celebration, I looked at my notifications, and the first thing I saw was a tweet saying, "Holy shit, Lauren Southern just shot a flare gun at a boat full of refugee babies." Yeah. No, Will Song there, that is the editor of The Hill, just so you know. And that does have 350 likes. Thanks WikiLeaks. Yeah, so I was pretty much done for as soon as The Hill had tweeted out, "Funny factoid, Laura's shooting flares at refugee babies." You can find this little bit of information all over the internet to date about the mass-murdering right-wing flamethrower extremist. Luckily, this one isn't real, but that essentially might as well have been it. Granted, many sites after the fact did try to retract their articles, they did try to edit them, but still to this day, in fact, I literally just opened my Twitter, and I'm going to find it on my phone right here, to a tweet that said, "They should de-verify people who are out setting child refugees on fire like Lauren Southern did in Italy." That's my timeline right now, guys. And let's see, what's the one after this? Yeah, still to this day, Reason Magazine just a few months ago published an article saying I was doing just this, shooting flares at refugees. And just a few days ago, I had a mainstream media journalist tweeting me that I was killing drowning Mediterranean refugees. I gotta say, I feel like killing drowning people is a little redundant. Like, why implicate yourself? But this became my life for the next little bit. But why am I bringing this up? What is the relevance of my shenanigans in Europe and being slandered as a refugee murderer relevant to this topic? What is the point? I really just want to give people an idea of just how potent our fake news is, and just how brainwashed and wrong the media is on this situation. Because this is something I had to personally live through and experience to understand the gravity of it. I kind of thought fake news was just a bit of an election meme that we enjoyed, but once I personally experienced it and had my life just turned upside down by it, it really, really becomes something horrifyingly real. Later on in the Defend Europe mission, the fake news got so potent, you thought it couldn't get worse than that kind of stuff, but it got so potent that sites were referencing back to my flare situation with the new ship and saying it was allegedly torpedoing NGO boats. They used the word torpedo, and this is an Italian news site, mainstream. I even had websites that were photoshopping photos of my Mexico vacation beside pictures of drowning migrants. It's like they think I'm drinking martinis and kicking their hands off the side of the yacht. Like, it's unreal. I swear that almost every single news article from the mainstream media that came out about the Defend Europe mission was at least 90% falsified. We're talking The Independent, we're talking the New York Times, we're talking BuzzFeed, well that's a given. All of these sites, completely false, the things they were publishing. And I think it's much like most of the refugee crisis news, to be honest. For the past 3 years, it's very similar. They get this idea that because the refugee crisis, because the Defend Europe mission, because my flare situation is halfway across the world, no one is going to go look at it. No one is going to go investigate and see whether what is going on there is real or not, whether what they're reporting is real or not. So they take it for granted, and they just make things up. And that brings me to my topic for today, which is, if I were to ask you about the 2015 refugee crisis, what would you believe about it? Just seriously, try to think back to some of the articles you saw. Try to think back to some of the news you saw. Try to think back to some of the images that were on your TV screen. This was everything we saw back in 2015. Repeatedly, open the borders, open the borders. You probably heard about men and women fleeing Syria en masse due to wars caused by the United States and oppression from ISIS. You probably heard about evil right-wing terrorists trying to stop these desperate refugees by building walls in Hungary or by hunting people down in Bulgaria. And many of you likely believed that children were forced to drown in the Mediterranean because of people like myself who want border controls. And I don't blame you. Honestly, in 2015, I thought many, many similar things. But since then, I have done my fair share of investigation. And I'm here to tell you today that almost everything you have heard is completely false. We have all been lied to. And I don't say these things as someone with any sort of agenda or financial or political reasons. Hell, I have lost money because of this. I'm sure a lot of people saw me being kicked off Patreon for the Defend Europe stuff. I'm interested in truth here today, so I'm speaking simply as a young woman who decided to ask questions and find out if this was real. I've traveled to these hotspots in Europe. I've gone myself to see the refugee camps. I've been to the Mediterranean, and I've walked through many of the no-go zones in France, in Belgium, and in Europe, all over the place. And I've also spoken to hundreds and hundreds of migrants who have made that long trek across the Mediterranean to see what is really going on. And I repeat once again because I can barely believe it myself. And in the moment of discovering these things, I could barely believe it. But what we've been told is completely false. Even the most famous story of them all, probably the one picture that caused people's hearts to melt and to cry out for open borders, the young Syrian boy who washed up on the beach, Aylan Kurdi. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the picture before. It is absolutely horrible and heart-wrenching. But it was not Generation Identity, it was not UKIP, it was not nationalists in the Slavic nations who have opposed this mass migration or their ilk who caused his death, but instead it was the exact people that they have been trying to stop this entire time. Human traffickers who have been illegally smuggling migrants into Europe. Traffickers who use boats that they know will sink. They all know these boats will sink. They buy cheap dinghies and they send them out there, and half of them never make it. So in order for their business to keep going, they need to have NGOs. They need to have the promise of these NGOs coming and picking up these people in the sea. So traffickers send out their dinghies, they collect their cash, and the NGOs do the rest of the job, which has led to hundreds of deaths due to traffickers' gross negligence and the lure of these NGOs, which in some cases has now just become straight-up collusion. The Italian government is exposing this right now. NGOs straight up going and meeting with the traffickers, shaking hands, and bringing the migrants on board. It's become a business. People simply pay their way to be trafficked into Europe, and it costs about 3,000 to 5,000 euros if you're curious. 3,000 to 5,000 euros, which the Kurdi family, who were allegedly fleeing the Syrian conflict, just so happened to have on hand. You don't usually meet too many people that are fleeing a crisis and in desperation that have that kind of money so quickly. But maybe that is because the news, once again, has been lying to you. And the Kurdi family were not actually fleeing Syria at the time, but like many migrants, they were fleeing Turkey. For 3 years, they were in Turkey before they ever got on one of these dinghy boats. Turkey is not in an active conflict like Syria. And they were in no immediate danger at the time. In fact, their rent was being paid for by family in Canada. These are significant facts that were completely ignored by the mainstream media. For some reason, they did not get included in any of the articles regarding this young boy's death. It is horrible what happened to this young man and his family, but I'm not willing to lie about it like the media for a good story. The Kurdi family were not refugees in the traditional sense, and his death was not caused by right-wing policies or by anti-migration activists. It was a combination of both evil men and foolish liberals that led to the death of Aylan Kurdi. And this is not just a conspiracy theory. This is not just me trying to make something up so I sound right. No, people were actually charged for Aylan Kurdi's death. 2 Syrian men, not 2 nationalists in Europe. So how does a narrative like this become so prominent in our society? How do all of us just believe that it was these closed borders nationalists that caused this young boy's death on the beach? Well, you have to look to the media first to see how this happened. You have to look to how they work to understand it. One may think today that a journalist is someone who goes out and investigates things. One may think they do interviews and they search for truth. They're a respectable member of society who just wants to enlighten his fellow man. Unfortunately, that is not even remotely the case in today's day and age. In the current year, journalists fall into one of 2 categories. They're either some half-baked English major who is obsessed with soy lattes, avocado toast, elitism, and gossip, or they're some introvert in a basement picking Cheetos out of their belly button and constantly refreshing Twitter. And quite frankly, the latter of those 2 is significantly better in every case. The soy boys have no idea what is going on in the Mediterranean. They have no idea what is going on in the Middle East, and they sure as hell have no idea what is going on in the White House. They typically work for sites that rhyme with Muff Post, BuzzFeed, and Pew York Times, don't sue me. And the practice consists of reading a headline someone else wrote and just regurgitating it with a few pictures and a pop culture spin. Seriously, that is all journalists in the media do. It is a copy and paste and spin job. So if they see a picture of some black people running off a ship from the Mediterranean on the beaches of Sicily, they're going to do a quick privilege check, and they're going to write, "Refugees finally arrive in Europe, excited to bring more cultural diversity to Italy." And that's their story for the day. It doesn't matter to them where these people came from. It doesn't matter why they came. It doesn't matter if they're smuggling drugs or if they're members of ISIS. They have their protocol to go by. And their protocol is all dark-skinned individuals are poor, helpless refugees who must be protected at all costs, and any people who question the validity of the refugee status or of mass migration are heartless bigots. And that's that. This view is not only extremely patronizing, but it is an extremely ignorant, foolish, and harmful view to spread. It is damaging to both people of Europe who have to deal with this mass unchecked migration, and to the very real refugees who would not like to be thrown in the same boat, both physically and metaphorically, with extremists, economic migrant criminals, and individuals fleeing nothing but their responsibilities and their families. And despite what you have been reading for the last 3 years, despite the garbage indoctrination that has been thrown in your face by the mainstream media, the fact of the matter is that 90% of the people coming on these boats, 90% of the people even just walking by land, are not in fact even Syrian or fleeing any sort of war. Nor are they fleeing oppression, and nor are these women or children of poverty we hear of in the press. In fact, according to the UN this year, it was 68.6% fighting-age men that came into Europe posing as refugees. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, that's pretty high, but it's not that bad. That still means there were some women and children, right? Makes it worth it. Well, we actually have these stats on the amount of children that came in as well, and the UN places that at 18.3% children. That is, if you have drunk so much of the progressive Kool-Aid, you believe a bearded man on steroids can identify as a 6-year-old. But, you know, I do guess that's where our culture is headed anyway, so there's not much we can do about that. Let's look at some of the pictures of some of these child refugees in the 18.3% that are coming in. First of all, this wonderful young lad who won a contest in Sweden for sprinting against 12-year-olds. No, I'm not kidding. This is one of their fellow students, a 12-year-old, who won the sprinting contest in Sweden. And here's another youngster in gym with his class. They grow up so fast. Some more kiddos. The stubble's coming in a little earlier than usual, but you know. So, in studies actually done in Norway on dental records of child migrants, this isn't just the odd one out. 9 out of 10 were discovered to be faking it and to be over 18. And in Denmark, well, they did the same study, and turns out that 3 out of 4 of the people claiming to be kids in Denmark were not actually children, but full-grown men based on dental studies. And hearing about this, you may be wondering, well, what's it like in the other countries in Europe? What about the UK? Are they having as much of a problem? Well, the British Home Office now refuses to test their age. I can't imagine why. It's a little embarrassing having your entire narrative collapse on you like that. It's really shocking, though, to see that we have to even have dental tests in the first place to see that these are not children. How delusional and insane is our society today to put men with stubble beside children doing coloring books in classrooms? And there are pictures of these people in classrooms coloring. It's unreal. But there's always an excuse, isn't there? There's always a reason. Maybe these men and these trans children don't want to lie. Maybe they're facing serious oppression. Maybe it is so bad that they're forced to pretend they are kids, and they have no other option. Well, sword leftists, because that excuse won't work either. Let's take a guess on what the #1 reason for migrants crossing the Mediterranean according to the UN was. A little drum roll here. Oh, it's economics. Economic factors. Sorry, guys. How shocking. Last time I checked, wanting a raise and dealing with ISIS were kind of put on 2 different levels in the threat category. And what's scarier too is to think that most people who were interviewed likely threw in a few lies there to pretend they were fleeing oppression. Imagine how much worse the statistic would be if people were being entirely honest all the time. And another fun fact to throw in here, the majority of people coming over through the Mediterranean route are, where's the Syrians? I can't see them on the list. Can anyone see the Syrians on the list? No? No? Oh, they're not there. In fact, Syrians aren't even transiting through Libya anymore. And this is a UN study that was published. This whole narrative we were sold in 2015, 2016 has completely collapsed. Honestly, though, it is a bit refreshing to see the UN being so genuine because in my experience talking to migrants all over Europe, this is exactly what they told me as well. No matter where I was, if I was in camps in Germany, if I was in Catania, if I was in France, the UK, they all told me they came for economic reasons and for money. And in that case, if this is your reason, if you are coming for jobs, for money, for whatever it may be, for welfare, get to the back of the damn line. There are families who are waiting to go through the proper legal process. They want to learn the language. Maybe they already have. They're okay with getting background checks. You'd think that would be a little more required. they want to actually contribute something meaningful to the economy and to the culture. These are the migrants that Europe should be allowing in and putting first. These are the people that want to leave their homeland because they want to be protected from the individuals who are now storming the borders of Europe in hordes. It is insanity. If I haven't made it clear enough by now, for the past 3 years, we have been repeatedly lied to. We have been deceived. I can only imagine our ancestors rolling in their graves as we repeat the same foolish mistakes made long ago in Troy when they took in the Trojan horse. Only our Trojan horse is not made of wood, but it is made of sweet, syrupy lies that have been spun in the webs of modern journalists. Our Trojan horse is crafty camera angles and duplicitous pleas for progress and goodness. I remember I went to the Calais jungle last summer, and I remember interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people there, and I had quite a bit of trouble finding a single Syrian refugee, and this was back in 2016 when they were still going on about the Syrian refugee situation. I found men from Eritrea, I found Sudan, I found Afghanistan, I found Somalia, all over the freaking place, but I couldn't find any. I found one Syrian. And I couldn't find any women or children either. It was insane, because I went there after reading some Breitbart articles that were talking about how it was all men, and I didn't quite believe it. I wanted to see it for myself. But it turns out Breitbart was right all along. It was all fighting-age men in the Calais jungle. I couldn't wrap my head around how fake the whole thing was. But what was even more shocking than discovering all that was witnessing how these people set it up, witnessing the mainstream media in action. Like finding some diamond in the rough, the journalists who were also in the Calais jungle with me picked up these 3 kids. I saw maybe 4 or 5 kids the entire time I was there. It was a little weird. The kids spoke like 4 languages. Maybe they were CIA plants or something, I don't know. But they took them and they faced them away from Calais jungle towards the road. You can see in this picture on the left, that's one of the journalists that was there with the kids, and this is behind him, where it was all men from Africa on their cell phones. Yes, they all had cell phones. Yes, they all had cigarettes. Yes, they were all men. And then there were these 3 kids, and they faced the camera the other way. And they got all their shots, they got all their interviews, and then they left without showing the real situation, or the majority of the jungle. And from one deceitful angle in a shithole in France to your cell phone in California, the world was tricked time and time again into pressuring Europe to accept mass amounts of illegal, unchecked economic migrants, with religious extremists in their midst. And this was one of the other extremely scary factors about the Calais jungle. There were mosques all over the place. They had set up their little tents, wrote Intifada, whatever, on their tents, and there were I've probably saw like 20, 30 mosques there. And there was one church, and it had to be put out literally in a field, freaking crazy far away from the camps, because any of the Christians that wanted to go to church had to be protected by the French police, and the French police could not go into the Calais jungle safely, so they had to put the church extremely far away. And when the Christians did try to go to church, the 1% of Christians that were in this jungle, they would be beat up, they would be dragged out, they would be identified, even stabbed in some cases. It was nuts. And these are the people that liberals want you to camp. If you think they won't create enclaves very similar to the ones they created in the Calais jungle when they get there, you are dead wrong. Yet we still look to our false idols, the BBC, we still look to our false idols at CNN with a naive sparkle in our eye, thanking the Greeks for such beautiful cultural enrichment. The Greeks in both cases, I guess. Enrichment that includes massive increases in terrorism since the borders have been opened. And I mean, nothing could improve society more than importing Syrian refugees when 13% of them think ISIS is not that bad. At least it's somewhat positive. And of course, there's the economic enrichment that we're getting from this, with mass welfare spending and a large portion of society who are now jobless. Actually, a fascinating thing I learned in Germany was because so many of these young men do not have jobs, barely any of them. This is Sweden for this one, but this was back in 2016 that this article came out. So imagine how many people it is now that are jobless there. But because they're typically jobless and they're given a small amount of money when they go to the refugee centers, they go out, they hang out on the weekends, and they don't really want to spend the small amount of money they're given by the government on cabs getting back to the refugee centers. So what they do is they'll just throw a rock through a freaking window. They'll throw a rock through a freaking window so a cop will come and arrest them and drive them back to the refugee center because they don't have really identification. They don't have money to pay a ticket. They don't want to put them in their jails. They don't want to take them to court, so they will go and commit petty crimes in order to get a free taxi ride. And unfortunately, this is not just with petty crime. Of course, there has been a sharp uprising of violent crime and sexual assault in Europe as well. Fun fact, 9 out of 10 gang rapists in Sweden have foreign origins. 9 out of 10. It's almost like, shockingly, people have little respect for the rights of women and children when they come from nations that stone women for the crime of being raped. Are you feeling enriched yet? Yeah, we're feeling enriched? Wonderful. We vastly overestimate the power of assimilation, or rather, liberals do, when we are talking about communities that are being brought in en masse and being put into enclaves. And it is not going to work. It is going to fail. So what does this mean for the future of Europe at this point? Well, I will tell you one thing. I would not be running around Sicily getting tracked down by Interpol, having my passport flagged. When I go to airports now and I'm in the EU, they scan it and they just look up like it says right-wing terrorist on their screen and they call their higher-ups, and I have to go through a whole process of doing checkups now. So I wouldn't be doing that, and I certainly wouldn't be bothering to be accused of torpedoing drowning migrants if it weren't some serious shit we're dealing with in Europe. And it really is. Because Europe now has an unfortunate combination of problems. And this is not simply a temporary refugee crisis. Oh, wrong slide, my bad. This is not simply a temporary rise in crime and terror and economic hurt. Because unless there are drastic actions taken with mass deportations and immediate closing of the borders, it is here to stay, and it is going to grow and continue to grow. Because recent migrants do not even know what the word assimilate means, and who can blame them, really? If you're Turkish and you come into Europe, or you come into Germany, why would you go and live in a German city when you could just go join Little Turkey in Markslow and still get government benefits for your 5 wives? Seriously. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Markslow, but it looks like a constant 24/7 Turkish pride parade is going on there. Of course, without any of the gays. But you go there and there are flags, Turkish flags, that are entire apartment complexes. Every single car, every single house, Turkish flags. It is insane. And with high birth rates among Muslim immigrants that vastly overtake European ones, the clash of cultures is soon bound to become a war of cultures, with migrants who have no interest in European laws and certainly have no interest in their culture slowly becoming the majority in towns all across Europe and cities all across Europe. And if anyone knows German history or listens to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History and watch the episode or listen to the episode about the Munster Rebellion, you know that you really do not want a religious extremist becoming the majority in a democracy. Because that democracy will very quickly become 5 wolves and 1 sheep voting on what to have for dinner. I've always had this, granted, like most conservatives, that history repeats itself. And we are living through a simple cycle. You've probably heard it in the phrase of, bad times create strong men create good times, and good times create weak men, and then of course weak men create bad times. But I also like to have the visual with it, and Thomas Cole's The Course of Empire has always been a beautiful representation of this cycle. We all reach a certain point of decadence where we let our abundance blind us to the frank realities of the world, and we take for granted how we got there. And if this world full of fatty foods, soft drug laws, transgender kids, and free to download furry porn is decadent, then I don't know what is. We are in the blissful ignorance stage of Thomas Cole's art, We are forgetting our freedoms did not come to us for free. We are forgetting that our decadence was built on the back of hard work and ingenuity, and we are forgetting that our cultures we so enjoy have been invaded, pillaged, and conquered all throughout history time and time again. And we also forget that at some point in our lives, we will have to fight that battle for the West to keep them, whether that be a cultural one or a literal one. I really hope it doesn't get to that point. Because it is extremely naive to believe that the West is compatible with the values of a growing Islamic populace in Europe. It is extremely naive to believe that this can continue with a growing group like this. The crux of these cautionary tales in history that we read about so often are always on a long timeline, over hundreds and hundreds of years. We talk about the death of Rome and sentence as if it happened overnight, but as Rome was not built in a day, it didn't die in one either. And many people living in our history book stories that we read about likely thought that Rome would live forever, that it would last forever when they were living in that time. But as they always say in retrospect, hindsight is 20/20. We are now reaching our own apex in the tale of modern Western civilization. The problems we face will not simply dissipate into the ether. The spread of radical Islam, the replacement of native populations, the clash of cultures. These are all hallmarks of war. The fact that Western countries have become so generous with strangers that they are no longer sustainable for themselves, this is not something that can just be simply swept under the rug and forgotten about. I'm sure some of you saw just last week, France freaking ran out of money. I wonder what's happening there. Maybe you're taking too many migrants and not caring about your own people enough. If Europe is overrun by radical migrants, and if no-go zones become no-go cities, like they have in Markslow, like they have in Rotherham, like they have in Malmö and in Molenbeek, and all over the damn place, there is no easy way back. And unlike these idealistic liberals in their ivory towers, I'm not going to so flippantly ignore this so I can win some popularity contest with the press and the well-to-do classes. My ego is not worth the blood of innocent people, nor is it worth the Western world and our freedoms that allow me to give this speech in the first place and allow you to attend it. So of course the question comes to, what do we do now? Do we just swallow the black pill and cry about it? Or do we actually do something about our nations? Or, I mean, you could just convert. You could just embrace it. I mean, guys, 5 wives doesn't sound so bad. Ladies, you never have to pick another outfit in the morning. Just cosplay as a Nazgul all day. It's great. Seriously, though, that is not the option I personally want to go with. I'm not just going to sit here and do nothing. We have to use the situation that we have right now to motivate us rather than to let it be crushed by it. Certainly in America and my native Canada, things are not as bad as they could be. We have the benefit of oceans between us. And we have a long head start before we get to the position of places like France. So let's really take advantage of that. The West still has a fighting chance. I do believe that. The rhetoric of Trump has galvanized an entire generation of young people to oppose globalism and to love their nation and their heritage. They're not ashamed of it and do not want to give it up so easily for the sake of pathological altruism. Young people are increasingly... Oh, thank you. Gen X is going to save us. I believe it. Seriously though, young people are increasingly realizing that we do not lock our doors because we hate the people outside, but because we love the people inside. And if we can continue to cultivate that spirit of nationalism, I truly believe there is hope for America. I personally cannot predict the fate of Europe. All I can do is support the people there fighting for it now. It's looking like an impossible task, but I'll still back them. And all of us here, we have plenty a part to play in this, no matter how big or small. And I do encourage you to look into these stats yourself. I do encourage you to look into what's going on with the refugee crisis yourself. And don't take my word for it. If anyone tells you, just take my word for it and don't investigate, don't believe them. They don't want you to find something that will prove them wrong. I personally want you to go look into this. And if you do, and you decide to speak up about what you discovered, I can't promise you that the media won't accuse you of joining me in a mission to drown refugee babies in the Mediterranean. But what I can promise you is that being hated in the present is always worth being vindicated in the future. Especially, thank you. I have to say, especially when it is more than your own fate at stake. This is more than just us. This is our future. This is future generations. We are all carrying a very precious flame. Oh, that is not the very precious flame we are carrying. That is the one we're fighting against. We are all carrying a very precious flame that has been passed down from our forefathers before us, one of freedom, one of liberty. It is a flame that we cannot let go out. Let's keep it ablaze. Thank you for having me, guys. I do believe I'm here for a bit to answer some questions. Thank you. Yeah, these two guys, they're the best. All right, you three too. You're good too. Followers.
Testing. Okay, we're good. All right. Raise your hand if you have a question. And I'm going to start with the people closest to the front. I'm going to ask that you keep your questions brief so we can give as many people the chance to ask as possible.
Hi. So this whole quote refugee crisis thing, it's not just in Europe. It's really affected the world. I can say, for example, having spent a while living in Australia, investigative journalists found there not too long ago that a number of these so-called refugees were actually using welfare funds, I mean, at the expense of taxpayers, to actually fund terrorist activity domestically and internationally. And has that been going on in Europe as well? Do you have any insight to that?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, a lot of the people who are coming in and have committed crimes are or not crimes, but terrorism itself. We have discovered that some of these people are refugees, and just the fact that they're allowed to stay on the government's dime and allowed in the country and to travel there on the government's dime is helping terrorism. So I'd have to look into the situation in Australia personally, and I'd have to see what was going on there more, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not going to talk on something I don't know too much about, but yeah, I'll look into that for sure. So let me Rubio here for a second.
All right, I'm gonna come out through here real quick.
Hi, Lauren. How are you doing?
Very well.
Thank you for being here. And I just want to make this question brief. When you get to that age in life, will you run for Prime Minister in Canada?
Oh boy. I think we have enough estrogen in that office right now. I think I was about to say it's time for a man to take charge, and then I remembered I'm legally one in Canada, so maybe I will.
Hi, Lauren. How are you? My name
well.
is Candace Camper, and I am running against Maxine Waters for the 43rd District. And I'm a little older than you, but I really appreciate you standing up for my 29-year-old and my 24-year-old that needed to hear this speech also. That's why I'm standing up for my American children who come first in the United States, and also my nephew. But my question is to you. With the human trafficking, there's a big issue currently right now that I am personally investigating of the 64 to 170,000 young black girls that have been missing for quite some time, and a lot of people were saying that it was in regards to human trafficking. So I'm curious to know, did you see any of that in your travels to Europe and France, the human trafficking amongst young black girls?
Right, well, when we did see, there were barely any women in a lot of these crowds when we did see them, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of them were hidden in tents or were being trafficked along, because the people that are running these missions, the people that are colluding with these NGOs, are legitimate gangs and human traffickers, and it is not something that is a surprise to me. We've had rape gangs all across Europe. We've obviously had the big ones in Rotherham, where it was found out that you had migrants that were trafficking thousands of young women. So I'd have to once again look into this case specifically that you are speaking about. But if they were trafficking them, they were likely hiding them at that point, and I'd have to look into the case specifically. Black missing with refugees. Okay, black and missing is what it's called. Thank you very much, and thank you for running against Maxine Waters. That's amazing. Beautiful. Love it. Thank you so much.
Hey, Lauren. My name is Mark Risk. I am the newly elected chair of the Long Beach Young Republicans. I'm glad that you came here. I want to tell everyone something to keep in mind, because Lauren, everything she's saying is absolutely right. I am an Egyptian Christian, and I know my history very well. 1700 years ago, Egypt was one of the great jewels of Christendom, and then when we welcomed the Muslims at first, they were peaceful and loving to us. But centuries down the road, they turned into a bunch of rabid wolves. And as you now know today, Egypt, which was once the great jewels of Christendom, became Christians, and now in the land of Egypt became a minority in their own ancient ancestral homeland. So you're absolutely right. And if we're not careful about the whole Islamic terrorism situation, America could suffer the same fate of Egypt. So thank you very much for what you said today.
Thank you. Thank you for standing up. And just to touch on that is the really, truly sad thing about this too, is we are repeating something that has happened time and time and time again. And I can just imagine our ancestors in their grave just, holy shit, they're doing it again. How are they doing it again? Like, haven't they read a book? You know, like, it's unreal. So let's not make them facepalm too much and try not to let it get to its crux.
Okay, also I'm just testing because it sounded like it wasn't working. Okay. All right.
Two quick questions. How do we influence legislation or anything that's going on in Europe? You know, we're a different country. We're on the other side of the world. Second question, where's the hedgehog?
Where's the hedgehog? I wish I could travel with the hedgehogs, both beans and port, but unfortunately, there's so many laws about them actually. Like in certain cities, they're illegal, and they don't like planes much. I've flown with them a few times. But how do we influence legislation in Europe? That is a very good question. Of course, a lot of people here know about the Defend Europe mission and have supported it. So my big thing is the Europeans living there typically know most about what's going on there. So support their missions and try to help America. America has a big head start, but we're still going to be dealing with the same issues. We still have Islam trying to work its way. I'm sorry, Rubio. Rubio break. We still have Islam trying to work its way into our culture and into legislation. We still have problems of mass immigration. In Canada, of course, we have problems there as well. And opposing that and taking advantage of the head start you have here is one of the best things you can do. And of course, supporting groups in Europe like Generation Identity, which I'm sure there are people who both financially backed them and backed them by sharing their social media posts and giving them support. All of those are different ways that you can get involved and help out. But of course, home turf with the head start you have is the best way to go first, I think. Thanks, whoever that was. One clap.
All right, please make sure to raise your hands all the way so I can see them. Thank you.
Hi, Lauren. So what I want to ask is, essentially my generation, millennials, essentially what I want to call us, we're the headliner generation. All we do is read the headlines of news articles and don't read the article at all.
You must have hated this presentation.
Well, I know you tell the truth, but we just read headlines from terrible news sites and take it as fact, and they all believe that you're a horrible human being. And so what I want to know is, what can we do in order to essentially make the millennial generation, my generation, believe you and believe the problems that are actually going on, and obviously seeing terrible terrorist attacks within the U.S. and Europe, and seeing horrible statistics of rape is not enough.
That's the great quagmire we're in, isn't it? I remember getting pretty black-pilled for a while a few months ago when I accidentally clicked on the trending section of YouTube. I was like, oh my god, what is this? What are people watching? And there was this kid trending who, I can't remember his name, but he was creating videos where he was reenacting paranormal activity and pretending that he was being pulled out of his bed and everything. He was like, guys, this is totally happening. And millions of views. Millions of people believed him. He was totally faking it, and it just blew my mind that that was what was trending on YouTube, that that's what people were watching. And I got to this point of, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? But then I started to realize that a lot of what I've done, honestly, that I'm proud of, has not been my own work. It's not been just the stories or personal videos I've made. It's been the individuals that I've propped up. And if there are people that you can find that are great influencers, if there are people that you can find and you can help them spread the word, it's not about how many people you influence, but it's about finding the right ones that will listen and are interested in truth. Someone like Martin Zellner, who I helped out doing interviews with and propping up Generation Identity, which I believe has made great change in Europe. Or I'm sure a lot of you saw my first couple of videos where I covered the protests against Jordan Peterson. Well, I think Jordan Peterson would have become very famous on his own with his ideas. I do believe I helped at least prop him up and give awareness to that situation. And now look at what he's done. He's influencing the lives of millions of people. He's even been on mainstream stuff like H3H3 on YouTube doing his vaping and everything, which is great. And these individuals, if you can really get the thinkers and the people who are curious to galvanize against this culture of falsehood, those people will continue and they will spread all over the place. The branches will keep going and reaching further and further. It's about getting those individuals, though, because everyone's going to be convinced in a different way. So we need to diversify the way, so diverse and progressive. We need to diversify the way that we influence culture and society to go towards truth.
I'm going to go in here because I can get to the people in the middle.
All right.
Uh-oh, he's written a question down.
Yeah.
I'm screwed now.
So, the powers that be in Europe continue to ignore the consequences of the migrant crisis despite the overwhelming evidence that there's a real problem there. Now, part of that reason might be virtue signaling taken to the extreme, but do you believe it's possible that these leaders are just using this crisis as an excuse to justify further integration of the European Union?
Absolutely. That's actually what I think this is all about. I think that this has always been a plan to get rid of national identities of people, because if you don't have an identity, then you are easier controlled. That's why Marxists, for the most part, want to destroy the family union. They always say they want to destroy the family unit, because then you have to depend on the state. And then it can grow and grow and grow. There's a reason that the EU hates Poland so much. They don't want to let migrants. They have their own identity. They say, we are Poles. We can make our own decision. And the European Union hate it. If they can make us so separated, if they can get us to the point where when you knock on your neighbor's door for help because you are bleeding and crying and need aid, they want it so that your neighbor answers that door and they say, put on a hijab, or they don't even speak your language. They want it so that there is so much conflict between people and so much disconnect between people that the only person you have to go to is the government. And that is how the EU is planning on doing it. That's how they're planning on continuing their grasp and creating bigger and bigger governments, on making us just identityless individuals who need the state and nothing else. And I'm sorry, but cold bureaucracy cannot replace the warm and loving hearts of family, friends, culture, and society. I hope that we don't let do that.
Hey Lauren, my name's Omar Navarro. I'm running for Congress in the 43rd Congressional District. I'm also challenging Maxine Waters. I'm the only candidate who lives in the district. I'm the only candidate who's raised $200,000. Not only am I the only candidate who has $200,000, I have the endorsements of Roger Stone, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and
congrats,
Alex Jones. So I want to thank you for being here today. I appreciate that you're here. Thank you for being here. God bless you. Thank you for doing what you do. It takes a lot of honor to do what you're doing, traveling the world and making a difference. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Am I in the middle of a political campaign? What's weird yelling going on? I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I'm going to ask that no one just issue comments like appreciate what you have to say, but going forward, we like to just have questions. Thank you.
As a victim of fake news, I feel, I mean, you're a victim of fake news.
Did you kill baby refugees too?
No comment. No comment. In this world of leaks and of false media, what tips do you have for us to determine what's true and where it becomes ever more complicated?
Unfortunately, the best method takes time, of course, and that is making sure you read as much information as you can on the specific topic you're trying to figure out. Don't just have one source. I love Breitbart, and I think Breitbart is right about a lot of things. Yeah, for Breitbart. I have a friend who writes for them, Chris Tomlinson. He actually does mostly migration crisis stuff, and I go to him whenever I'm looking at the migrant crisis. But even though I know he's going to be right in most cases, even though I know he's very good with his data, I always make sure to go and read left-wing sources on it as well. I always make sure to follow lefty pages and see what they're saying about it as well, because I could have missed something. There's an aspect I could have overlooked, and I never want to become like the left, who just click on a 50-second video on Now This and decide who is and isn't a bigot and decide what is and isn't truth, because that's how you create an echo chamber. So even when you are very convinced that your side is right, make sure you diversify the amount of information you intake. Now, of course, the great complex that we have right now, or the great thing we are faced with, is how do we convince other people to do this? We are living in the age of 1-minute videos, or I'm not going to watch it, TLDR. So that is the crisis we are in now, and it's, like I said, having people in different ways, all different ways, trying to influence the world, whether it be PewDiePie doing a video that's sort of right-wing in his silly way that people watch. That's really cool. It's awesome to see that. And it's going to be a matter of coming at it from all different angles. Hopefully that helped. I'm sorry. I don't have the answers to everything. I'm trying.
Hi. With Poland standing out from the other European countries with Muslim terrorism and all of that, what are some of the extra security measures they've been taking?
Not taking in Muslims. Yeah, no, seriously, that is one of the big factors. It's, as much as people laughed at Donald Trump Jr.'s analogy of the poison Skittles, it's serious. You would not take a handful from a bowl where one of the Skittles could be poison. And you have to have extreme vetting. I personally like the Australian point system. I think they have really good immigration, but in a case where you're having people come from countries where radical terrorism is rampant, in a place where you have people coming from countries where even just having a radical culture where women are stoned for the crime of being raped, you have to have very, very serious vetting. And Poles do not stand for that crap. They will not take that. I'm sure people saw the, 60,000 Poles with their flares in the streets of Warsaw. That was a very, very cool thing to say, a big middle finger to the European Union. But yeah, one of their big factors is they have a very, very homogenous society. And if you do move to Poland, you better freaking assimilate. You better freaking assimilate, or you won't last long there. And that's what you need to have for a country. I'm not anti having wonderful people come into a country, but they better assimilate. And do not overestimate the power of assimilation. Make sure that you have people coming in at a rate that they can actually learn the language, learn the culture, and become a part of the nation.
You need to annex Poland, otherwise Poland annexes.
Yeah.
As another victim of fake news regarding Laguna Beach, I want to ask you, is this situation regarding Europe and mass migration a potential unifying issue that all factions of the right wing agree on? And if so, how would you convince people to start focusing on the end goal of stopping these Muslim perverts as opposed to getting worked up over minor disagreements?
Ooh, that's a great question, isn't it? And I do believe that that is something that unifies the right. I really do believe that migration obviously is something that we can all agree on. Now, petty disagreements, how do we stop that? It's interesting because we are out of election season. We are out of the Trump being elected phase of this, so everyone is just looking inwards and criticizing their own movement, which I don't think is a bad thing. I've made a video on this where I said, to an extent, if you don't criticize yourself and cut off the cancers in your movement and such, you become like the left, who took advantage of having a lemming-like movement and having so many people supported. They never criticized the violence in their movement. They never criticized the kill all white men crazies and sycophants in their movement, and that made them a very powerful cultural influencer. However, it also is slowly killing them, as we're watching to this date, where Antifa is making them look like fools, where their sycophants is making them look like fools, and I don't want that to happen to the right. So I have no problem calling out the sycophants on the right. I have no problem calling out the fools and the hucksters on the right, and they do exist. They do. And I'm sure there are plenty of criticisms people can make of me as well. We need to always be improving ourselves. However, when it does come to issues like mass migration and like the Islamic caliphate that potentially form in Europe at some point, that's where we need to put arguments aside and say, let's focus on this policy. And I don't know how that is going to come. Hopefully that's around election times. Hopefully that's around making decisions like the protests in Warsaw and people building walls in Hungary and promoting more nationalist politicians. But there are lots of ways that can happen. But never stop criticizing yourself and looking inward, I'd say.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely.
I'm a huge fan. What is your advice for a conservative that wants to work in the field of art that is dominated by postmodernism and the left?
I want to ask, what kind of art do you do?
Mainly graphic design and like more classical paintings.
Oh, beautiful. I love classical art. I'm a big fan. As you can see, my wanderer above the fog. But ooh, that's a difficult one. You have to... I'm not in the art field. I'm an appreciator of it. I love artistry, but I have also been quite jaded by walking down the streets and seeing what art has become. Some random pole sticking out of the ground with some scribbles on it. What modern art has become is just an embarrassment. And I know it can be difficult. I read these stories of, what was it, a poet who kept creating beautiful, beautiful work, and he could never get published until he changed his name to an Asian name. And that's when they published him, because then it filled a diversity quota for them. Then they allowed it to be published. So you're really playing with fire in that field. I've had photographers that have taken beautiful pictures of me that weren't even really right-wing. They just took my photo that got banned and cast aside from all the agencies they were working with simply for taking my photo. So as much as I do want to tell people when you're in those fields to be excited and honest about your beliefs and everything, there's an aspect of, I'd say, be more, if you're worried about being fired, if you're worried of not being able to influence your field, have a more Socrates approach. Just ask questions. Ask questions that help lead people to conclusions that are the correct ones. And, I mean, by correct, of course, I don't just mean my belief, I mean truth. I mean truthful. Like, what is beauty? And I think just through your art and finding people that appreciate it, you can help spread beauty in that way too. I can't imagine how difficult it is to be in the field of art right now. I'd love to see your work though. I'd love to see your classical painting. So if I do get a chance to run into you after, I will help promote your work so that you can help fix the art industry.
Hello, Lauren. The
Hello.
Polish Christopher. The song that was sung during the protests in Warsaw is a national anthem. And some of the lyrics actually describe very clearly how the Polish king and the Polish army stopped the Ottoman Empire at the gates of Vienna. So that's why it was sung beautifully throughout the entire protest. I am a very pragmatic conservative. I have a great difficulty understanding liberalism.
Most of us do.
Especially the one that is driven by this Islamization of Western civilization, that's driven by LGBT, a lot of it. And obviously we see what LGBT, their faith is under Islam, So how is it that the liberals are inviting, a lot of them are LGBT, and they're inviting Islam onto our doorsteps?
It's a confusing question, isn't it? Cognitive dissonance. I don't know how to describe it other than they are so deluded by their own narrative they've built up that they truly believe a society with Muslims that are still beholden to their beliefs from their home countries and LGBT communities can coexist. That is despite the fact that you can't have pride parades in certain areas of Sweden. That is despite the fact that when I arrived in Molenbeek that day, a transgender individual was stabbed to death the night I spent there. It was my birthday. It's absolute insanity that they think these two can coexist. But that is most liberal ideas are this utopian fantasy. It's the idea that you can have open borders in a welfare state, that you can just pick money off of trees and everyone can go on welfare. And who knows where that money comes from? It doesn't matter, right? It's all these. It's a very happy world to live in, honestly. Why not? Why wouldn't you want to live in that world where everyone could just have free money, where everyone could just get along, where everything could work perfectly? And why are these people trying to destroy our dream? Why are they trying to tell us this can't happen? Of course they don't want to hear what we have to say because it's real and it's unfortunate and it sucks and the world it's a really shitty place and there's a lot of shitty people in it and a lot of people don't want to hear that and I don't blame them, but we got to help them see the reality sooner or later because they are also going to suffer and they might be the biggest ones. They might be the people who suffer the most as a result of this, as you said, the LGBT people who are in a suicidal manner letting these people in hordes, and hopefully we can convince them before it's too late.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you for coming. In my view, issues like the migrant crisis and the rise of widespread degeneracy have really helped align moderates and centrists with conservatives and with the right. In your view, what issue poses a great threat with taking those people and aligning them with the left again?
Sorry, can you repeat your question? I didn't quite.
What major issue, in your view, would pose the greatest threat towards taking normal centrist people and aligning them with the left?
What greatest issue would they face? Am I dumb? Am I?
So,
it could be
so like as you've illustrated, the migrant crisis, it helps centrists. They align with us now. They see this and they align with conservatives.
Oh, I'm understanding now.
Yeah,
so what is the biggest issue that makes them align with the left?
Potentially.
Potentially. Whew. See, you're trying to make me understand liberalism, and I think it's what I was just, I know, but you do have to understand the people that you are arguing against, and you do have to try to offer them some sympathy, and I would say that, of course, there's that aspect of the utopian view of you don't want to acknowledge that the world is this terrible place. You don't want to acknowledge that maybe diversity is our strength is not a mantra that is going to work forever. Why would you want to live in this world that conservatives describe? It's a horrible, horrible world, right? But it's just the real one. There are beautiful things about it. There are wonderful things about it, and that's what we're trying to protect and preserve. However, those things come at a cost, and a lot of it is this idealism, but a lot of it, I would say, is also default liberalism and wanting to be a part of a group, wanting to be a part of something that is popular. And throughout history, women especially, actually, they survive by having popularity in groups and having social skills and survival. And if you're suddenly rejected from people because you're a conservative, you're rejected from popular society because you're right-wing, well, you would die historically in some cases, especially if you were a woman. So this biological interest to have popularity and also this hopefulness in people has really caused them to align with liberals. And maybe we shouldn't be so black-pilled. Maybe we should offer more hope, and maybe we should talk more about the beautiful things that we do want to preserve. Maybe we should talk more about the wonderful, lovely things that are in the world and not be so negative all the time, because that's why we're doing a lot of this. But those are one of the two big reasons I think people lean towards liberalism. Thanks, Guy.
Hello, Lauren. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
So my question for you is a little bit more personal. By the way, I'm also running against Maxine. No, I'm not.
Oh, God.
You've spoken a lot about demographic change in the past in Europe, and so I'm kind of wondering what you think, on a personal level, that you can do, that you've been doing perhaps, and then also just in general what you plan to do in the future. Do you plan on torpedoing any more refugee boats? Just in general, like what kind of future projects can we expect from you?
Right, so I think everyone has a different part to play in this, and of course I think I may have really excommunicated myself from having much political influence in the traditional sense, but I do believe my part to play in this is hopefully spreading truth and spreading other people's stories. And in the near future, you will be seeing more content in Europe, flights booked and everything. So you will be seeing interviews with people that have been affected by this crisis. You will be seeing more investigations into the impact of towns. People really, it sucks because you can show them all the data in the world, you can show them all your personal experiences, but unless they see it on film, unless it is so damn obvious to them what is happening, a lot of people will just reject and deny it. So I'm really going to be trying to get some of these stories and the reality of Islamization, especially in places like London and the UK, on film. And you will be seeing that very, very soon from me. I love the shirt. I think I said it too earlier.
Thank you, Lauren. Two quick questions. One is, would you consider coming to the anti-Sharia rally that's happening in San Bernardino the day after tomorrow on Saturday?
If I were here, I absolutely would, but I am leaving tomorrow, unfortunately. Flight's booked already. Last time I went to anti-Sharia, I also got fox piss thrown on me at an anti-Sharia rally, so they don't really, the protesters, shockingly, don't like women that much, apparently.
Understandable. Okay, the main question, are you aware of the mounting evidence of the growing genocide in South Africa? And if so, would you consider advocating for those refugees from that and the atrocities they're facing?
I am very, very aware of what is going on in South Africa, and you know, I've actually written videos on it and almost done videos on it, but I've always wanted to go there first and experience it before, well, not experience what's going on because it's horrible what's going on, but see what is going on the ground before I really do any content on it. And I actually have, a few months ago, I had a flight booked there and I was about to go on it, but something came up that made it so that I couldn't go on that trip. And I really am upset that that didn't happen, but I do plan on going investigating that in the near future because that is a crisis. And everyone that's watching on YouTube in the live stream, look into what is going on in South Africa because there is a serious attack on the farmers there, and a lot of the population is being racially attacked there, which is horrible.
Two quick questions. I like the beginning of your presentation, but you started, you got to a point where you talked about extreme vetting. Does the founding stock of any nation have a moral obligation to take in any amount of people, or can they just close their borders completely? And the second question is, it seems that it would be important or at least helpful to know about who is funding these NGOs. Do you know of any patterns or coincidences among the major funders and demographics or anything like that?
I know that George Soros is a mass funder of a lot of these NGOs. I will say too, I understand where your question is coming from in the first bit. Does anyone have a moral obligation to take in any immigration? That is a much bigger question and debate that I would probably have to have at a different time when I had prepped more for it, because that is a very interesting moral question, and I personally am not a philosopher in the traditional sense. However, I will say I do, oh, is that a noise? Sorry, distracting ADD. When I was in Poland, for example, I think the homogeneity of a country is something that does need to be protected. Poland, you never see this in places in America or Canada, but I went to a graveyard in Donetsk, and every single grave that was there had a candle lit at it. Every single one. People had come throughout the day and lit them and cleaned the graves and everything, and this was an old graveyard, but it was like that because the families have lived there for so long. families and their grandchildren and their children. They had lived there for so long that they took care of these areas, and it meant a lot, and they had a connection and a history on that land, and they wanted to protect it and defend it. And when you have immigration at a rate that there is no assimilation or even connection to the families, the land, and the people that live there, well, people don't typically care for the society or care to take care of it or to preserve any of the cultures or history. And I do think that's a real question that needs to be faced, and that's why I am for extremely low rates of immigration, and I am for extreme vetting for that purpose, because I do want to preserve the cultures and the freedoms and values that have kept the West alive for so long. That doesn't mean no immigration, but that does mean extremely low immigration.
Can I just follow up on his question? I know identitarianism in Europe as well as America is kind of a rising force. You have a lot of YouTubers like you've had on your channel, Nick Fuentes, James Alsop, who kind of eschew the same type of identitarian, you know, traditionalist mindset. Even you can even argue Richard Spencer, who himself identifies as identitarian. What is your and a group like Identity Europa? What is your opinion of identitarianism for European Americans in the United States and Canada?
It's funny, I was just in a debate about this with Richard Spencer. Some of you may have seen it. It's online on Twitter. But this is the thing. I have a friend of mine who is with the Identitarians in Europe who is going to be making a video on this soon, I believe, but I would honestly rather leave it to the Identitarians to describe their movement themselves. I've supported a lot of their work. I've done videos of a lot of their work, but I am not someone who is as well-read in the philosophy of identitarianism as a lot of the people in Europe that have actually founded the movement, and I would prefer people go and read their work personally, but they do see a distinct difference from when I've asked them the same question. They see a distinct difference between themselves and the American identitarians, because personally they see a lot of the American Europeans as having homelands in Europe, not in America. And you'd have to ask them about it personally, but I do see a slight difference between them, but there will be further debates between myself and people like Spencer, I will tell you that. So you can look forward to that when I'm more prepared.
So my question relates to assimilation. So in the United States, we are graced with this kind of civic nationalist spirit that we all have thanks for, that this idea that anyone can come to an America and be an American. But in Europe, like throughout European history, you see this idea of the growth of a nation state, that a country comes around a group of people like the English or the French. I still have hope for the United States that we can, with that spirit, assimilate people. But in Europe, even before the migrant crisis, there was a really big struggle to have people assimilate. You had these enclaves, especially in England, of Pakistani immigrants. So I'm just wondering what hope, say tomorrow Europe changes its position 180 degrees, what hope is there for assimilation of these people who are already there?
Oh man, we're at the point, I think, honestly, in places like France where Camus' remigration idea is like one of the only things they have left. I've been in France, Paris a lot, and I've been to these no-go zones right outside Paris, and I've had mainstream journalists, I wish I were kidding, but I've had mainstream journalists come up to me and tell me when we were about to be in the middle of a riot in a no-go zone in Paris, cover your hair right now or you are going to get us hurt. These are liberals that are perfectly fine telling you they don't believe these things when they write up their articles when they go home, but in the moment they know they have to tell me to cover my hair. And the riot we were going to was actually happening, I'm just going to give you a little backstory because it's funny. They were rioting in this no-go zone because an individual was escaping the cops after committing a crime and drove his ATV into a bus, and they blamed the cops for it and had a riot. And none of the police would even go into this no-go zone. I'm sure you've seen the videos where the police get beat up and have their cars smashed when they go into the no-go zones in Paris. The police laughed at the idea of going in there and said, "Get the hell out of here right now, are you people crazy?" This was in the suburbs of Paris, a first world country where the police can't go and where I have to cover my hair and we're afraid of dying, and we are being told by people not to get in cars because they may stand in front of our car and drag us out and beat us to death. Paris. We are at a point there where there's been so little assimilation and so much migration. You have, what's it called? Bus stations, can't remember the exact name right now, where people are just arriving by the hundreds every single day. I have a video on it. You can go check out Paris bus station, Lauren Southern. They're just arriving in the hundreds by busload. if not from Syria, not refugees whatsoever, and just going all over France. There has to be remigration. They have to be sent back. They have to go back, to say it. If they want France to survive, they're going to have to make some serious, serious changes. So not a lot of hope unless there's the remigration.
Hi, Lauren. I just want to compliment you on your speech. It was really good. Much more intelligent and articulate than any low-energy left-wing professor I've ever had. My question is more about free speech. To quote a famous water buffalo, how can we have a reasonable discussion about issues like this? Chankunger for people that don't know. How can we have a reasonable discussion about issues like this with not just people on the right, but centrists and liberals and even crazy, wacky leftos, without resorting to violence? And I know it's easier said than done, but how can we talk about these things without losing our minds? Because that is literally the death of a society when we can't just sit down and talk. I was walking here and I'm like, what is President Trump here? With all this security, I was like, all this just for a little blonde Canadian white girl to speak about refugees? It's just ridiculous. So do you think we can actually have a reasonable discussion as a culture and society without resorting to violence, or do you think we're going towards a more dark path?
Ooh, that's a tough one. What I would say to that is, first of all, similar to the other answers I've given, don't throw your pearls before swine. I've had myself been attacked multiple times when people had random liquids thrown on me and people call me names and such, and I could break down and be offended by these things and be upset and fall apart and fall in violence, but instead I choose whose opinions I find valuable based on how reasonable an individual is. If it were my father who were doing these terrible things to me, if it were a respected individual or professor or writer that did these things to me, I'd say, well, they must have a pretty damn good reason for doing it, and I'd be upset by these actions. But I choose to instead take a calmer route and decide these are the actions of people that are not relevant in a larger battle of things. The people that you want to convince and galvanize to support the ideas of nationalism and free speech are the individuals that are going to be willing to listen to you in the first place. And when you meet someone, no matter how liberal they are, if they're willing to listen and they're willing to have a debate with you, spend your time on them. Don't spend it on shrieking harpies with their pink hair that are throwing piss at you. Spend it on your liberal friends that are willing to listen. They do exist. I'll give them that. There are a lot of crazy liberals, but there are some decent ones that are interested in the truth. And that's how I'm sure there are people in this room that started as liberals and maybe turned to conservatism. I've had family members like that. There we go. See, they do exist, and they can be convinced if you give them the facts. And spend your time on those. I like how there was only one. It's not giving us too much hope.
Hi, Lauren. How are you doing?
Very well.
My question is this. What message would you like to give if you could speak to all Americans at this moment in time and take as much time as you'd like? And my second question is, what can we do, what action can we take to further the cause of conservatism in the United States?
Take advantage of what you have now. Take advantage of the spirit of the nation that you have now. You have a people that, whether you like Donald Trump or not, it has become quite evident that people are frustrated and they are angry with the current state of things. They want to see an usurping of the current government, the current order. They want to see the deep state exposed. They want to see globalism combated. Take advantage of that spirit and don't let it die out. Don't get bored of it. Don't thank you. Don't let liberals take our wind out of us and really, really galvanize the young generations. Because like I was saying earlier, Gen X, I think they are truly going to be our saviors. They are watching the failure, or Gen Z, sorry, not Gen X. What am I saying? No, Gen Z, they are watching the failures of feminism. They are watching the failures of modern liberalism, they are saying, we do not want that. We do not want to end up like Miley Cyrus running around with a dildo strapped to her and the crazy wig. We don't want to end up like the wine single mothers that hate men and are just angry with the world. We don't want to end up like that. And they're going back to traditionalism. They're going back to conservatism. They're going back to loving their nation and the values that created it. And I truly believe we can win their hearts and their minds. So that's what I would say to Americans.
Hello and good evening. My name is Julian, and well, just really quick, based on the question the guy had asked, I think it's very important that well, at least in my personal experience, getting away from social media and actually establishing dialogue face to face. Everybody always says, oh, you always talk about the same thing, but I always like to use this example. I used to work at Chick-fil-A on Bruce MacArthur, and I was able to convince 7 other Mexicans that were born in Mexico to at least tell me that they were going to get to vote for Trump, because you just have to sit down and kind of communicate the entire message. And at least in my personal experience, doing that through Facebook has been very inefficient and a waste of time. But when you sit down face to face with people and you talk to people and you communicate the reality of what's going on in Europe, here in the United States, and even in Mexico, people pay attention and they're like, dang, maybe I should not vote for this other person. Now to my question. In Europe, when you were in Europe, did you ever meet any of the refugees that were maybe willing to go to Europe, get an education, strengthen themselves as an individual, and then go back to the original country and try to better their country there? Did you ever meet anyone at all?
See, unfortunately, the problem with that is a lot of the refugees that I went and spoke to were individuals that were going there illegally. And a lot of the people with those kind of morals and values are the ones that go places legally. And I do really sympathize with that view, though, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because I really do not like the approach people have today, and I'd even criticize myself in a bit, because I haven't talked to Canada in a long time, because I'm just like, F that. Like, we are so far gone. But no, I really do need to do more content on Canada. I really do need to not give up on my home country. And you see a lot of these refugees that are fleeing a terrible situation, migrants rather, instead of trying to fix it and really saying, I care about my people, I care about my family, I care about this country. I'm going to work my ass off and dedicate my life to trying to fix and improve things. And maybe that does mean going to a foreign country, getting an education in the traditional sense, making money, whatever. But I really sympathize with that viewpoint. Unfortunately, a lot of the people I talked to, like I said, were individuals that were coming through the illegal method and don't have a lot of morals and values in that sense, and they were all these young fighting age men that were abandoning a lot of their responsibilities. But I don't doubt there are people in Europe that came there legally and are working there legally that do have those values and do want to go back and help their own country. But thank you for your question. I appreciate it.
All right, we're running a bit low on time. I've seen 2 hands up for a while now. We're going to just stick to those 2, and then we're probably going to stop. Afterwards, if like security's okay with that, we are going to we can meet Laura and take a picture. And we will, and if you have a question that wasn't answered, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer it.
I am the ex-liberal. There's actually a 6 or 7 year gap in between. Then I learned how to think.
Congratulations on your healing process.
My question was about Generation Z, but it already got answered. I just want to say we do have to reach out to them because a lot of them will be voting in 2020. And as for your hedgehog, bringing it here might be easier if it identifies as a therapy hedgehog.
Oh, I never thought of it that way.
Hedgehog.
That is a good idea. I'd have to get both of them registered, but...
Lauren, thank you for coming. Huge fan.
Thank you.
I saw your video a while back where you clarified about identity politics and where you stand right now on that. I know that you continue to still support Defend Europe. Do you still describe yourself as an identitarian? And do you feel that something like Defend Europe needs to happen here in America now? And I would assume you would agree with it in Canada from what you just mentioned before with your remarks, but where do you stand on identitarianism and also something like Defend Europe taking place here in America as well as in Canada?
It's really funny talking to the European identitarians because they look over to America and they think we're so funny. They look at the Battle of Berkeley and they're like, why are they all dressing up as gladiators? They don't understand it. They love it, and they think it's so entertaining, but it's so American to them. And another thing that is very American to them is they don't understand why the right in America is so opposed to kind of protesting and having actions, events. And I had to kind of talk to them about how ridiculous the left has looked in the process of doing that and how silly they've made protests too. And it's true though, conservatives don't like doing actions or protests or anything. I mean, some people have done it before where they stormed the stage of Julius Caesar, which I do think made us look a little silly to an extent. I don't think that was a clever option. But I do think in America that there could be a smart sense, a smart influence from identitarianism where we pick and choose our battles in a way where we oppose illegal actions instead of free speech plays, and that could be an action conservatives could do, a real protest against things that are illegal migration, real actions that make, even putting CNN as fake news above their headquarters. That would be really cool. And that's something the European identitarians told me they would do immediately if they lived here. So there are things to learn from the right in Europe that we can learn in America and Canada, and also vice versa. And I do think we need to bridge that gap more and talk to them because they have so many creative ideas over there. And I do see and have a lot of hope for that kind of activism to make its way over here, hopefully in a more clever way than the Julius Caesar sense. Absolutely. Thanks for your question.
All right, one more round of applause for Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me and for coming out, everyone. I really appreciate it. All right. Okay, awkward silence. There we go. Canada!